Join us in the pledge. Bill, please lead us in the
Surely.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I hereby call to order the April 16th public hearing of the City of Prescott Board of Adjustment. Members present, starting at my right, James D'Arienzo, Phil King. To my left, Johnny Forker. My name's Michael Klein. To my far left, I'm going to start with her because I forget to announce her every time, is our recording secretary, Suzanne Derryberry. Staff present is George Worley, Planning Director, Planning Manager, Frank Hall, Community Planner, and Matt Pedracki, our Assistant City Attorney. In addition, present, I see Mayor Kirkendall, Councilman Greg Lozelle, and James Lamerson. Thanks for being here. This is an open public hearing and is being videotaped and tape recorded by the city. The proceedings are being televised by representatives of the public media, local cable and radio stations, and may also be rebroadcast. The number of commission members present is 4. It will require 4 votes for a majority. All parties wishing to be heard on an issue are required to raise their hands and be recognized by the chairman prior to speaking. Speakers will be expected to state their name and address for the record so that we may know who is speaking and be able to contact them at a later date if necessary. Please turn off any cell phones or electronic devices if you haven't already done so. Please sign the attendance roster before leaving the meeting. Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the February 19th, 2015 minutes. Could I get a motion, please?
I make a motion that we approve the February 19, 2015 minutes as submitted.
Second.
All those in favor, raise their hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Well, we'll have to look at the minutes next. You could still vote if you'd like. Okay. Minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is variance 15-002, 1430 Quarry Lane. I guess, Frank, it's all yours.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Frank Hall, Community Planner for the City of Prescott. Today we're talking about a variance for 1430 Quarry Lane in the Granite Shadows community off Iron Springs Road in Prescott. The applicant is requesting a variance down to 7 feet front yard setback for a front enclosed porch or patio. They call it patio, we call it a porch. Zoning definitions vary. The applicant is seeking the variance in order to be able to keep the porch that is constructed on the house. They did begin it without a permit. However, they have come into compliance. They're working on coming into compliance. The porch did previously exist. The applicant is requesting this variance, which is not inconsistent with the surrounding community. On a site visit, I went out there and I found that almost half, if not more than, the units in that neighborhood, in that community, that whole Granite Shadows community, have some sort of nonconformity, whether it be a front porch, a side yard setback, a rear extension on a home, something. There's always something in that community, even probably half of the units. The 7-foot setback, I don't believe, would give them any special privilege than what's provided in the community from other units. The staff would be favorable of a favorable recommendation from the board, and I know the applicant is here to speak if you need her. The variance is the minimum amount necessary to keep what they constructed. Part of the issue that happened is when they purchased the home, there was a single wide trailer on the lot. Well, they wanted to improve it, which the neighbors were all appreciative of because it was kind of a bad home, and they put in a double wide. But when they put in the double wide, the front porch lost some space because it was wider, and they couldn't go further back because of setbacks and topographic features, and in quite realistically, they couldn't go any further forward because of that rock. So They're kind of stuck in the middle of their lot because of these topographic features. There's the porch in the background there.
Nice rock.
And then, as you can see, their site plan, back again, shows the new double wide on quarry land. So with that, I could go through the variance criteria if you'd like, or they're in my staff report. If there's any other questions you have, I'm here for you, and I know the applicant's here today as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hall.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hall? No. Okay, the applicant is here. Would you like to come up and add anything?
I don't think so. I think that the report was
Okay. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address this issue?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I should say that I did not receive a single negative comment from the neighborhood. In my staff report, I think I mentioned 2 or 3 favorables. I've had many more since then, since I've written the staff report, of the community being in support of the...
Okay,
course.
thank you. Again, anyone else would like to address this issue? Then we'll close the public hearing. Could I get a motion, please?
I'll make the motion. Make the motion we approve variance 15-002 as submitted.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
It's passed. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda. Is the appeal of a City of Prescott administrative decision on the cessation of the non-conforming status of a sign. This is a little different. This is not a public hearing. This is an appeal of an administrative action. So what I'm going to do is start out, before we get started, I'd like to ask all those that intend to speak to this issue to please stand and be sworn in. Do you solemnly affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. The property owner on this item is appealing an administrative decision made by the City of Prescott regarding the cessation of a non-conforming status of a sign. The way this hearing will work is I'm going to give the city staff an opportunity to present their case. The board will be given a time to question the staff. Then the property owner will have an opportunity to present their case, and again, the city will, or the board will be able to question the applicant. And I want to let everyone know you'll be given plenty of time to plead your case, so please make sure you include everything you'd like to. So we'll get started. George, please start us off. Oh, let me add one thing. Just for the sake, I had to look at page 2 of my notes. The board needs to be aware that the city attorney's office here is representing the city of Prescott, and not necessarily the board here. So if there are legal issues that arise that we need legal advice on, we would need to get that legal advice elsewhere. Okay. Mr. Worley, thank you.
Thank you, sir. We've provided you with a staff report and packet of information that backs up the staff's contention that the sign was abandoned at the American Motel at 1211 East Gurley Street. Part of the submittal that you have includes code enforcement cases related to the overall condition of the site, as well as information directly from the city's land development code in relation to non-conforming signs and the lapsing process that's associated with those signs when they lose their non-conforming status. The American Motel stopped paying TPT, our rental bed tax, to the city in 2010. The last time it was operated as a motel would have been at that time. Any use of it subsequent to that date would have been an illegal use of the property. So we're assuming that in 2010 the motel completely ceased operation as a motel. After that date, the information that we've provided to you on the condition of the property is to demonstrate the property owner of record, which was the Yu Family Trust, that's YU Family Trust, failed to make any active use of the property, failed to take any corrective measures to maintain the property until they were notified by the city with notices of violation, and allowed the property to deteriorate with no regard for its future use until and unless the city noticed them of a particular issue, in which case only those particular issues were addressed. In cases where non-conforming structures exist, our code provides for the continuation of those structures unless they're significantly modified, with a very significant difference associated with signs. There is an entirely separate section of non-conforming signs adopted in the code, and you have copies of that as well as the full code, that address how non-conforming signs should be retired, if the word is acceptable to you, so that they can be replaced with something that's conforming to the current code. The whole concept of non-conformance, often called grandfathering, is that you allow a use that doesn't meet current requirements to extend for some period of time so that the property owner doesn't lose a use or right or grant that they may have at the time that a code change occurs. In this particular case, the sign predated the current land development code by many, many years. It's a very old sign. They were grandfathered in, but the assumption under the land development code, and again specifically in 10.5, and you have copies of that, that the assumption is that there will be continued use of that sign to maintain that grandfathering status. In this particular case, again, based on our understanding of taxes being paid, maintenance of the property, the general condition and rundown condition of the property, and I do have a few photographs of the sign over various time periods to show you. It was staff's determination, based on 10.5.3, the section of the code that we've given you, that this sign was abandoned many years ago by the property owner. There was no evidence of any intent by the property owner to continue the use of the sign or even to maintain it in its most basic level throughout that entire time period. Because the motel use ended in 2010, we've only gone back that far to provide you information about the abandonment of the sign. It was intermittently used along with a number of issues associated with building, sign, and code enforcement code cases prior to that date, but it was still in operation as a motel. So we did not consider the sign abandoned until they stopped using it as a motel, and at that point the sign became abandoned. The sign code provides for an appeal process, which is why we're here today, which allows the property owner, is primarily the person who's responsible, to provide proof to the city that they had an intent to maintain the sign and continue the operation of the sign. As you can see from the evidence we've provided, we have a letter from a holding company that said, gee, it would be nice, and I apologize, it's a synopsis of the letter, it would be nice to keep the sign, but there was no evidence provided of intent. There was no explanation of why the sign was allowed to deteriorate over the time period that it was allowed to deteriorate over. And again, there was no intention expressed in that letter to continue the operation of the American Motel. So one of the things that we've used in order to provide you sort of an indication of the conditions, we've provided a number of photographs. So those were included in the packet. I'm going to put them up today just for clarification purposes that indicate the condition of the sign at various time periods. Most of these photos were taken by our code enforcement department, and as a result, they are time and date stamped. However, the time and date stamp's a little hard to read on signs, or excuse me, on the photographs. So this was in 2011, approximately a year after the closing of the hotel operation. You can see the sign was still in place. All of the hotel-related information is still on the changeable copy sign. None of it was removed. None of it's been changed to represent the fact that the motel was closed. The overall condition of the property is evidenced by this photo taken from the interior of the property. And again, this is a code enforcement photograph from 2011. In 2012, code enforcement was back out there for renewed growth of vegetation throughout the site, and this is an example photo taken at that time. In 2014, another code case was opened, and as part of photography associated with maintaining it, the sign was part of that. You can see it still represents the hotel as if it were open. There's no change to the sign. It's been sitting there unused for any particular purpose. The hotel has been out of operation for 4 years at the time of the photo. And still this information is on there. At the time of that photo, again, this was the condition of the actual property inside. Approximately about the same time, there was a fire in the building. The building department was called out along with the fire department to look at the condition of the building. The property holding company was required to board up portions of the hotel in order to secure it, to provide some safety to the public and to eliminate any attractive nuisance situation where open windows or open doors would attract people into the buildings. This was taken at the beginning of the month, and you can see, and let's see if I can, oh, that made it worse. There we go. You can see that the sign has still not been used for anything. It's got portions of text on it that have fallen off. The changeable copy portion of the signs still aren't used for any other purposes. It doesn't even advertise the hotel for sale. It's just simply abandoned and sitting there with bits falling off of it. And then one last photo. Again, all of these were included in the packet. Approximately the same time, this is the other side of the sign. And you can see it's a very large sign that far exceeds the current allowances. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, one of the purposes of non-conforming provisions in land development codes, specifically those related to signs, is to let the property owner get some active use out of a sign that doesn't conform. But the intent of non-conformance is that eventually it will be made to conform. And specifically for signs, we have a time period established and we have a process established to declare those signs abandoned. And that was what was followed with this particular case. It is clearly not used for a motel. It was clearly not used in the intervening for now almost 5 years since the hotel stopped operating and stopped paying the city the bed tax. It has sat unused, unmodified, and unmaintained for that time period. We believe that clearly triggered the requirements of Article 10.5.3. It clearly was an abandoned sign, and the city in December sent notification to the property owner of record, again, the U Family Trust, which was forwarded on to Resolute Land Services. They are the holding company, or were the holding company at that time, advising them of that abandonment. I have also here today who may want to speak to you and certainly are available for answering any questions. Our code compliance, chief code compliance officer and our chief building official, both are very familiar with this site, having spent much time here dealing with deteriorating circumstances and attempting to get a non-responsive property owner to take action on those circumstances. So with that, I will end my presentation, but certainly we'll be available for discussion. And if you would indulge me just a moment, I would like to invite each of the two compliance officers to step up and just give you a very brief comment about some of the issues that they've dealt with on this property.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Chairman and board members. My name is Mike Fleming. I'm the Chief Code Compliance Officer with the City of Prescott. Presently been employed with the City of Prescott for almost a year. So my experience with American Lodge goes back from May of last year to the present. As George already indicated, there's been a numerous amount of code compliance cases on the property. I believe it's in your packet. If you have any direct questions, I'll be happy to answer anything.
What I'll do, we'll have the next staff member, and then we'll ask questions, if you don't mind.
Good morning, I'm Randy Plummer, Chief Building Official. I've actually posted this property minimum of 2 times as not occupiable. Once was before the fire, and then there were some homeless people that knocked in the door and took up residence and started fire in the building. Fire departments was called out. I in turn got called out for it. Then I posted it again after that as not habitable, and it's considered an unsafe structure. Have had no permits, no maintenance done. They have boarded up the broken windows when they've been asked for 2, but other than that, we have not had any significant contact with the property owners.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from the board?
I'd like to ask a question.
Mr. Darian.
Has there ever been a written and or verbal communication to your department personally once you have found the infractions and the violations? Has either of the previous owner or the owners of record today have ever commented or communicated to you at all after you have submitted
I'm going to say no. They have corrected stuff. So in other words, I issue notice violations and for broken windows and those kind of things, and they did not come contact us, but their board showed up on windows.
So there was an action based upon your report, but they did not communicate anything?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
At least for me.
Yeah. Mr. Before you step down, I'd like to ask you one quick question. Kind of following up on that. Who was the notification sent to when you sent the violations and the work was completed?
The U Family Trust, which is we get off the county website and use that as our legal means.
So all the notifications were sent to the U Family Trust?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for staff?
Just that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the U Family Trust is the owner of record.
As of the last check of the county records, yes. There is a holding company, Resolute Land Services, that took over for them, supposedly the maintenance and operation of the property. That occurred, the address was changed in the county records so that if you mailed to the U Family Trust, it went to Resolute Land Services. So,
Are there any renovations, any activity going on, any permits pulled for renovation or repair?
None at this time, no, sir.
Nothing.
no, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, if
So
there's...
we are available to answer any further questions that may come up during the process. Staff would like to conclude by requesting that this board affirm our determination that the sign was abandoned and confirm that, in fact, the code provisions that we followed are effective and in effect for this property.
Thank you very much. I would now invite the property owner or their representative to come up and make your presentation. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Christopher Paul Browning. I'm one of the property owners at the present time, and live at 1876 North Peaceful Mesa Drive here in Prescott.
Thank you.
First off, I want to clarify a few things. We've owned the property for all of 2 weeks. We have not, the only correspondence that we have seen has been correspondence that's been through Resolute Trust and the U Family Trust. So that's basically all we have as far as a record, as far as the history on this sign. We bought the property with the intent to totally renovate the property. One of the issues that we looked at was the sign. This area in Prescott is and has been in the past targeted for another historic district. I don't know where that stands, whether it's ever going to happen, but as part of that, it was going to be the historic motor court district, which I would think that the sign at that point would be part of the historic district. That didn't impact the reason that we bought the property, but it did impact how we may or may not brand this property. We have a tenant on this property that's going to take the entire parcel. They have no interest in signage. Their business does not require signage. It's not a facility that you need to know where it is in order to go to it. So the only reason that we need the signage or would like to consider using the signage is for branding purposes. It's always known. We've got information from Charlotte Hall, which shows that the property back in the 40s. That shows the signage on it. It's been known under different names over the course of time. It probably was not always known as the American Motel and Suites. It's probably known as something else, but it was always known with that signage as you approach Prescott, that was what you saw when you came into the town. It's interesting to me anyway, based on what I now know from the history of the correspondence that's been going on here, is that 2010 seems to be this threshold as far as when the property went into nonconformance. But it took until 2014 before there was any correspondence that really went out to try and enforce the nonconformance of that sign. Also, as a point of fact, is that we went in front of PAC prior to December of 2014 with the intent to show them what we wanted to do with this property, and the sign never came up as far as that they were going to enforce tearing the sign down. I guess what we're looking at is that from a standpoint of, I also want to say that our family has been in this area since the late 80s. We've developed in this area and in Prescott Valley. We've done a tremendous amount of high quality commercial development here. We're not just a flip type of a developer. When we buy a piece of property, we fix it, we hold it long term, and that's what our intent is on this property as well. So it's not at our advantage to try and do something that is not going to be benefit to the town. What we're basically asking is, we've only owned this 2 weeks. The history of, whether that building has been, has violations on it as far as the upkeep and stuff, has absolutely nothing to do with us, has nothing to do with that sign. The only reason that we're here is the sign. And the sign to us, after 2 weeks, we have not made a determination as far as what we would like to do with that sign. Whether that sign stays or goes hasn't been determined by our family as far as the development of this property. All we're asking is that since was it you or Woo? Okay. Since Hughes walked away from it in 2010, their abandonment was of the property. The Resolute Trust had absolutely no interest in it from a business standpoint or a signage standpoint, because all they were doing was holding the property until they could find a buyer for Hughes that walked away from the property. So Hughes may very well have abandoned the use of the property, but we're the first people in since Hughes have been there, and our contention is that we may like to consider using that sign as part of branding with it. So that's our argument.
Is there any questions for the
I have a few.
Yes.
The first is, are you in agreement, or do you like the fact we have a particular code for both non-conforming signs and current code for signs. Is it reasonable to you that we have that in the city to make sure that throughout the city, signs are really aesthetic looking? Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so now the second question is, as this violation comes forward from the U group to you, it continues. The violations continue. So as a new owner, you have absorbed those violations. You have absorbed that privilege that's now gone away. Does that make sense? That privilege that was with the motel.
You know, I can agree with that from a legal
Okay,
standpoint, yeah.
so
Yeah.
what you're asking now is to have this sign continue to be non-conforming. That's what you're really asking. Is
Right.
that- Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned in your presentation that you were looking at doing renovations on the property, on the buildings.
Right.
So any renovations you undertook would have to be in compliance with current city codes. You'd have to bring the buildings up to current code.
Or request a continuation of the nonconformance of the sign.
Yeah. And you don't intend to use it. You said you had a tenant.
No, I did not say we did not intend to use it.
Not to sign the property. You have a tenant who's
We
going to
have a tenant that does not need that sign.
and does not need the sign.
Right.
Well, okay. Thank you.
Question, you mentioned the use of the sign, not necessarily for identification, because your user doesn't need that, but for branding. Could you explain a little bit more?
Well, the information that we've been able to get from Charlotte Hall, it was originally known as the Mission Lodge. And there was a big sign out there which said Mission Lodge. And internally, what we've been looking at is to rebrand it back to something like the Mission Office Suites or whatever. But we have not made a determination as far as what we want to do as far as the branding on it goes. But it was all part of, or it is all part of the street frontage facelift that we want to do on the building, as far as whether we want to bring it back to more what it was back in the 40s as the Mission Lodge and the signage that went with it at that time. And again, like I say, you know, the tenant doesn't need the signage. It is purely a function of whether we would be granted non-conformance status to continue using it as a historic sign on that site.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much. Is there, could I ask you, before you step down, just a question. Is there anyone that you can contact, or is there anyone here from this Resolute
No.
company?
No.
So the only ones present here today are you as the current owners who've owned it for 2 weeks?
Correct.
Okay. It's no fair to ask you the questions I was going to ask, so.
Okay.
I've got some questions for staff. I guess my first question is, why eliminate the use of the sign? What's the point?
There is a basic underlying contention in zoning codes that everything should meet the zoning code. Grandfathering or allowing for non-conforming signs is a method to allow the property owner to have extended use of that property so that it's not considered a form of taking of something that they may have had active use of at the time that the codes changed. We have very specific requirements in the Land Development Code for signage that allows for continued use of the sign, but once it's been abandoned, the intent of the code is to have everything conform to the current code. And that would mean signage at this site would need to conform to the current code requirements for signage. It does not prohibit signage on the site. An elimination of this non-conforming sign would not in any way stop the current property owner from installing a sign compliant with current code requirements.
What is the difference between what is now a non-conforming sign and what would be a conforming sign?
There are two nonconformances that are pretty obvious from a strict code reading. The sign size is overly large per our current code. It's just measuring one face of each of the signs approaching 100 square feet. We would allow 24 square feet under the current code. The other is the maximum height of the sign. Under our current code, we would allow you 12 feet of maximum height. Any new business moving in would be allowed a sign that met those criteria under our current code, as would any new business moving in anywhere in town be allowed those same size signs.
So just on Gurley Street, I'm thinking just because it's close and it's a motel, the Prescottonia Motel signs would be non-conforming.
They are
signs?
non-conforming, that's correct. But actively used and therefore still in compliance with the provisions of 10.5.3.
Right. So the question comes down to the decision to end the non-conforming use is to try to bring everything into conformance along Gurley, or in that district.
The intention of adopting a new zoning code is to
Okay.
bring everything into conformance eventually. That's
Okay.
correct.
Any other questions?
I have another comment.
Please.
If in fact this board were to grant this particular applicant to continue to use a non-conforming sign after it has been abandoned, that opens up the city for all future non-conforming signs to be abandoned and to have a willy-nilly operation by saying, well, the board did it for one person, they can do it for another. The code is quite specific on the elimination of this non-conforming sign. So,
Johnny, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No comment.
Okay. Then I would ask for a motion, please.
Is there anyone else?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anything that the applicant would like to add?
The only thing I would like to clarify is, my reading of the sign code, it's still going to be in non-conformance. So we're on the BG, we're a BG zoning in that area, and my reading of the code is that we can go up to 20 feet in height. We can go up to, I think it's 2 square feet per 1 lineal foot of frontage along the right-of-way, up to a maximum of 100 square feet. So I respectfully disagree with the interpretation that we're only allowed 24 square feet and 12 feet in height.
Could you please explain that to us again?
The sign ordinance within your zoning code, I believe, which this property is part of my interpretation, is it's a BG Business General zoning district. And the Business General along that commercial street would allow a sign up to 20 feet in height. And then there's a percentage, there's a square footage percentage based on the number of lineal feet of street frontage that you have. So my interpretation is that even though we were told to tear the sign down, we would by right be able to have at least a 20-foot high sign with a sign square footage base of whatever the lineal footage is times 2 square feet or 2% or whatever it is.
Okay. Thank you very
But
much.
it's just, I think that's a clarification that needs to be made, is that I don't think it's only 24 square feet that we would be allowed on that site.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond to that, Mr. Worley?
I can clarify that. There are two calculations in our code relating to signs. One is an overall calculation for the site, and it is based on the linear frontage of the buildings on the site, and would allow a situation similar to this up to 100 square feet total signage. Most of that signage is reserved for the building itself. There's a specific criteria relating to freestanding signs in commercial districts that limits it to 12 feet maximum height and 24 square feet in area. and it's actually provided for in a, I apologize, let me zoom in a little bit on here. Falls under businesses 1 or 2, and this is specifically related to freestanding signage. And businesses 1 or 2 would be allowed an area of 24 square feet and a height of 12 square feet for the freestanding sign. Any of the additional signage that's calculated for the site would have to be attached to the building and could be up to the maximum of 100 square feet.
Any other discussion, comments? Then, before I'm troubled with this a little bit in the respect that I think the current owners, it's difficult to respond to something when you own the property for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, the previous owners had total disregard for any of the letters or correspondence that were sent to them, and I think did you an injustice, quite frankly. But with that being said, I'll call for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments as well. It seems that in the recent purchase may or may not be problematic, but that the city did act properly in trying to contact the owners of record. Any renovations to the building would have to be done to bring it up to existing code, and that would include the sign package. So I believe the city acted properly in this matter and would move to affirm the decision of the community development staff.
Okay, could I get a second?
Second.
Second. Any further discussion?
I have just one more comment.
Yes, sir.
In our code 10.6.1, the applicant, if it's denied today, can come back and ask for a conditional use or variance. Is that not right? Is that not right? I mean, they're going to, if they lose today, they can go back and say, okay, we're going to now make another application to see if we can keep this sign as a conditional use or a variance. I think they can do that.
I don't know that that's the case. I think that the appeal would be denied, and I think the next step is Superior Court, correct?
Well, if I'm reading this correctly, though, it says that an owner of a non-conforming sign, when they are out of compliance and have the timeline and lose that privilege, they can either do a couple of things. Number one, this is now 10.6.1. Replace the existing use with a conforming use. They can rezone the district, apply for that, or they can apply for conditional use. Or they can modify the structure or sign. They can apply for a variance or rezone the district. That's their relief before they go to court. I'm pretty sure that's the way I read this. I'm not an attorney, so I can't specifically say that, but it's spelled out right in the codes what they can do for relief when they don't get relief today.
My argument to that is, you're not really dealing so much with the nonconformity anymore. You're dealing with the abandonment issue. So the decision before you today was that sign abandoned, and that's pretty straightforward in the code on what that means. Has there been a cessation of the sign usage for 12 months? So once if it's deemed abandoned, then I think their next move is going to be to Superior Court for a record review here. So I think there's a distinction between the nonconformity and the abandonment issue.
Okay.
And I do want to say that Mr. Pedracki is not giving us advice. He's arguing on behalf of the city.
Yes, right. I understand.
Unfortunately, I think that some of the historic nature of that sign, I mean, I've been here long enough where I remember since I'm a kid that sign's been there. And I can see why, we don't want to lose some of that character. However, I think that the holding company and the previous owner had disregard for what was going on, and unfortunately, according to the letter of the law, it's a abandoned sign. So well, we've got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Sorry, but it's deemed abandoned. Any other items on the agenda that we need to address?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay, then meeting's adjourned.